Bem-vindos ao podcast What Drives You. Aqui exploramos histórias, estratégias e ferramentas das pessoas que têm bem claro o que as move. Por isso, se queres ser uma delas, mantém-te por aí, porque a jornada vai começar. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the What Drives You podcast, another one in English, and I just wanted to start by saying thank you to everyone who's been sending messages saying that my English ain't that bad. I know it's not perfect, I'm working on it in public, and without further ado, let me introduce you to today's guest, which is Becky. Now, Becky is this amazing human being that works in two different areas, sustainability and plants, okay? And I heard I come in contact with Becky from our common friends in Rejves cohort, which you guys know, and Becky worked with them in order to put some plants in their space to create a better environment. And I thought that was such a different and amazing idea that I had to know who was the person behind it. So I sent a text to Becky. She said, of course, let's do it. And so we did this interview, and we talk about a lot of different things. We talk about the journey that Becky had to travel in order to get to where she is today, about a lot of different choices that she did in her career. How did meditation help? How did she end up working in sustainability, and the process of mining through to a great company which many of you guys may know called Tiffany's, but also how is Portugal treating her, and now and a lot about her new business, plant-based business called Green Elbows. So I hope you guys like this interview. I really did. I think Becky is this amazing human being. You guys should definitely follow her and her social, which we left the links in the description. And that's it, basically. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you so much to Becky. And here's my interview with her and their project Green Elbows. Go. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the What Drives You podcast. And today with me I have Rebecca Burton. Rebecca, thank you so much for doing this once again. And I just wanted to start with a question, and that is, how is Portugal, and especially Ericeira, treating you?
Oh, so well, Joel. Sometimes when I get on calls with people from around the world, they're calling in from places where it's snowing like crazy, or even if it's not snowing, there's ice around in the mornings, and they ask me, how is it over there? And it sort of depends on the audience in terms of how much I'll gush about Portugal. If I feel that I need to protect their feelings, I'll say, oh, we have a mix of rain and sun. But if it's people can be really honest with, I just say, wow, it's honestly paradise. It's beautiful here.
Yeah, and Ericeira to me is one of the best places in Portugal. It's really, really beautiful. So I have a lot of questions. All right, and because you before I this interview, I already made a small bio about yourself, but I really wanted to start by asking you something. You have two jobs. You were talking before we started this, and one of them is Green Elbows, and another one is a project in mining. So most of all my questions are about Green Elbows, but I would really love to start by hearing about this project of mining. So please explain to me and to the audience what you do in that area.
I will. If it's okay, I'm going to take you on a little journey.
Go ahead,
over the past 2 decades of my professional development, basically, and how I got to where I am today, because I think it's really important when I'm speaking with younger people and they tell me, I don't know what I want to do in life. I am still trying to figure it out. I don't know what major I should have. And there's so much pressure I feel, or that I'm sensing from them, that they need to make the decision now. And the biggest advice I would give them, and the biggest advice I would give myself at that age, is you have 60 years or whatever it is, 60, 70 years, depending on, after you're 20, to figure out what you want to do and to let that change constantly. And honestly, the world is in a place where you can do that, and where it allows for exploration and curiosity and change, a lot of change. And so I would just say, don't worry if your career track changes many, many times. Do what you love now, explore that, and work as hard as, work in it as much as you want now. And then as new things come up and develop in you, follow that and see where it goes. So I'll just tell you, what does that actually mean for the past 2 decades? So I actually started out in landscape architecture, which is fascinating to look back on because that's what I'm doing in Green Elbows now. That's an aspect of what I'm doing, is designing green spaces. Well, a year and a half into my program in landscape architecture, I had the opportunity to travel to Kenya and work with some communities there, and just fell in love with international travel and development and all things related to that. And so when I came back, I decided, let me actually move to international studies, and I moved away from landscape architecture. So the international studies took me to my first real job, which was working in a study abroad office at a university and helping other students find opportunities to travel. And I did that for a year. And I also welcomed a lot of international students to our university. And then after a year in that work, I thought, I really want to explore this idea of development and actually potentially living abroad and working, let's say, for a nonprofit organization. So I went to Kenya for several months and met with so many organizations, and whether they were working with children or working with populations that were disabled or women's groups or whatever it might be. And I just saw the incredible work that was happening on the ground. And for me personally, I felt that those who were working on the ground and had the experience there were better placed to provide the direct services.
Yeah.
And so that was a really, really big shift for me, actually. And so that's why I'm spending a little bit of time on this, but it was a really big shift for me to think, rather than me coming in and providing the direct services, I actually would like to go back. I'm from the United States, so go back and work for an organization where I can connect those with funding or those with expertise to provide support to those who are working on the ground and have knowledge of the context, who are locals. So I came back, and it took a while for me to get there. There were a couple of years where I was working for some nonprofits in Salt Lake, in film and in still sort of development and service. And then I got to sort of I'll say the clearest part, I guess, of my journey, which is in 2009, I decided to go to graduate school in economic and political development. And basically what, other students, just to give you a sense of what we actually do, other students in my program work for the United Nations or work for big NGOs that you might have heard of. They work for the World Bank. That's sort of what the degree prepares people for. So I went to Columbia University and studied there, and that was a really important point for me because within those first few weeks, I basically learned about this program called Net Impact. And the idea was helping students in development figure out how to apply business-like principles to make development sort of stronger or work more efficiently. And then it also helps business students think about more than just the financial bottom line, but to think about people and the planet.
The social part.
And
right?
it was, say it again?
The social part as well, right?
Exactly, the social and environmental part, exactly right. And I was just so drawn to this, and that's really what brings me to the mining work that you referenced today, because I started to get involved with Net Impact, and then in my studies, I started to really focus in on corporate social responsibility and sustainability. They're sort of often spoken of in, being similar or being almost, they're used often for to describe the same thing, which is basically, how do you ensure that a business is operating responsibly? And by doing so, adding to the communities from which it sources, or the employees that it has working there, or often there are companies, by the way that they source or the way that they treat their employees, are also impacting the earth and the environment. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Rebecca, but can you give me an example of precisely that you just said? A company, because I'm trying to figure out because I've actually talked a little bit with with people here in Portugal that have some kind of that job, helping corporates to make sure that they're doing it they're working in a sustainable way. But I'm having a hard time figuring out an example of what you just said. A company that, by the way they treat their employees, are also having an impact on Earth. Can you just help me to understand? Like, can you give me an
Yeah,
example?
absolutely. That's a really good one to unpack. Let me see if I can sort of phrase it in a different way. So, one thing that I think is really fascinating is when companies commit to paying a living wage. Not
Okay.
fascinating, but really important. And
Yeah.
the idea being that when a company decides, so in a lot of countries you have a minimum wage, right? And
Yeah.
in other countries, that minimum wage is maybe not necessarily set or not necessarily honored. And so a company can go in and they can actually decide to pay a living wage, which often goes beyond what would
The
be the
minimum wage. Yeah.
minimum wage as well. And there's actually a whole methodology and a whole way that you go about actually figuring out what the minimum wage is. You figure out what housing costs, food costs, school costs, and that type of thing, so that you're really paying people a wage that allows them to live
So that's
securely,
amazing. I haven't heard about
comfortably.
that.
And yeah, it's a really, really important aspect, I think, actually. And
Yeah.
so you're right. When I said treating people well and sort of how that translates to the environment, I think I sort of tripped up on my words. It was more both social and
Yeah, I
environment.
understand.
So
Okay, okay.
yeah, exactly. So
Sorry.
no, not at all. Your clarification is perfect, actually, because I'm realizing back on my words that that needs to be clarified. But so living wage, for example, is a really good example. Is one way that a company can, I would say, exceed sort of the norm
Yeah.
in terms of corporate responsibility. Because if
Hmm.
you think about like clothing, right? And we've heard about issues in the clothing supply chains
Yeah.
where there have been fires in factories, for
The factories.
example,
Yeah.
and those tragedies. And so if you think about when a company is really looking at where are clothes made, how are those workers treated, are we paying them a living wage? Those that has a really big impact in terms of society, right?
Yeah.
So that's when I think about corporate social responsibility, that's one aspect of Mini.
Yeah.
And I'll go into that a little bit more in terms of the mining work,
Hmm.
as I describe what we're actually doing in the mining work.
Yeah.
So just to sort of rewind back in terms of my own journey, and the reason that I'm focusing here is, again, just to help unpack how I came to where I am, because I think it's really important to talk about the process, right? Like,
Yeah.
not just this is what I did in my resume, but to talk about how I decided to make the particular steps in my resume. So 10 years ago, so I'm thinking like the first 10 years I've sort of already described. And
Hmm.
I would say those were sort of more of a patchwork. It was more exploration. You
Yeah.
know, I went from landscape architecture to working in film. I taught English for a while. There was a lot of sampling going on,
Yeah.
which I think is really good because you really decide what you actually love. And that's really what was happening in my 20s. And then this last decade is where I really honed in.
Can I
And
just ask one
please,
one question about those first 10 years, which is because
yes.
I'm trying. I'm walking in your shoes, and I'm curious about how did you react to that constant change? Because I see a lot of people that when they realize that they don't like it's not that they don't like, but they find another area which interests them, but they don't pursue it because they're afraid of change. So how did you think about that? How did you make what did you say to yourself, or how did you what was your process to feeling so comfortable in changing from this area to this area to this area? Is that something you can describe, or was it just natural?
That is such a good question. I think it's a mix of both natural, just because I've always been a person that likes to sort of sample, if that
Okay.
makes sense. I'm thinking about even before my professional career. And as a child, I did everything from theater to horseback riding to, I
Okay.
don't know, all kinds of things. So I've sort of been a natural sampler, I guess,
Right.
if you want to say it that way. But this is a good question, because especially sort of the pressure early on to
Yeah.
decide what you're going to do, I definitely understand that. And let's see, a couple of thoughts about that. The first one is answering your question, but kind of coming at it from a different angle, which is the way that I got most of my jobs was actually through internships. So, sort of exploring something in a way where you're not committing to it full
Yeah.
time, and
That's such a
you're
great idea.
providing, yeah, and I really do emphasize this, because it really is the way that I've gotten all of my jobs and taken me to where I am today. So the study abroad job, for example, when I was a student, I got an internship. It was 10 hours a week in the International Center, welcoming international students and helping them navigate the system and find housing and navigate the cultural shift. And I loved that work so much. And then because I had worked for a year in the International Center and met everyone in that space, I was then able to transition to have a full-time job, sort of doing the opposite, which was working in the study abroad office and helping, my colleagues from the US go and study abroad. And so, and I don't think I would have had that. It basically started as, I'll just rewind again, which is I volunteered a couple of weekends to help at the new student orientations.
Hmm.
Then that transitioned into an internship, which transitioned into the first full-time job.
All right.
And so I think that's really important in terms of those early years.
Yeah.
Exploring what you love to do through
Hmm.
internships is an
Hmm.
excellent way. And then when you're there, and if you like it and you sort of prove yourself, right, you show up and you do excellent work,
Yeah.
that can often lead to more work.
Yeah.
And
Amazing.
and then in terms of the change, for me, I actually, when I look back on those years, I often held 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And so I was able to explore and be very, very fluid, because let's say that one was not really interesting me as much, I was able to let that go because I had these other jobs. And so
Nice.
that's why I really describe it as a patchwork,
Yeah.
because there
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
so many interests going on, and I was basically making a living by doing such a variety of things,
Yeah.
often at the same time.
All right.
And so that's what I would just say is
Yeah.
figure, and even one of them was working at a restaurant, right? It was sort of like that was the backbone, which
All right.
actually I loved. I loved working at a restaurant, but that was the backbone. And then I was able to explore things that were more closely aligned with where I wanted to go professionally, right? Or
All right.
career-wise.
Okay. Perfect. So let's jump into these next 10 years. Go
The
ahead.
next decade where it was more refined. So that decade started out with me being in Tanzania at I was doing basically the internship that's required between the 2 years of graduate school. And during that internship, I was studying medicinal plants in Tanzania. We were doing interviews with elders there and different people there. How did they use medicinal plants? Were those plants disappearing from the landscape? And it was really wonderful to just talk with the locals about this particular aspect. So you can start to see the green
Yeah.
coming back in, and sort of that draw that I initially had way back, it's a landscape architecture, gosh, back in 99, is starting to come again in 2010. And so when I was there in Tanzania, I had a lot of time actually to just reflect and, quite honestly, meditate. I took up a meditation practice. And with that clarity of that, every day I would meditate for 20 or 30 minutes, and it just started to allow my mind to settle. And there became this point of clarity where I said, when I go back, I have one more year of graduate school. And then in terms of work, I know that I want my profession to involve 3 things. I want to work for a multinational. I knew I wanted to work on the corporate side, and that I wanted to have big impact, or that they had the power to have impact. I knew that I wanted to work with some touch point on the environment, protection of the environment, that type of thing. And given that I was in Tanzania and I traveled to Kenya, I really wanted to have some touch points in Africa as well. So those were 3 things that I was holding in my mind. And then when I went back to graduate school, there was basically a service through Columbia where you could set up sort of a job search where you said, this is what I want, basically send me jobs that match these requirements. And so about a month after my return, an opportunity came to work at the Tiffany and Company Foundation. So Tiffany and Company is the jeweler, and they have a foundation that focused at that time on urban parks, responsible mining, and coral conservation. And then Tiffany, of course, sources metals and diamonds for their work, right? And so when you think about where those products come from, they come from around the world. And of course, mining has this strong link to the environment, right? And then a multinational. So the reason that I share this story and that I'm pausing here is that when I looked at around at my fellow students and I talked to others who were doing the job search, I realized that some of their views were a bit too large, and that it was actually undermining their success for finding work that they really wanted to do. Meaning, some of them would say, I really want to work on women's issues. But what exactly?
Yeah, that's really
Empowerment
broad.
of girls, protection of women in, domestic situations. Are you working with elderly women? Like, how do you actually refine that a bit more so that when an opportunity comes to you, you say, yes,
that's it.
What I want to do. Yeah. So you keep it broad enough that you're sort of open to possibility, but refined enough so that you recognize when it comes in, yes, this meets what I want to do. So this particular opportunity aligned with those three things that I outlined. And basically I stayed with the company and worked with them up until 2018. So that was an 8-year, it was a refining in that way, brought me to this place where I worked for them for 8 years.
Yeah.
And I finally ended up leaving the company, not because I didn't love the work. I actually loved the work. The company does amazing work in terms of corporate responsibility, supporting conservation initiatives, for example. They're actually a leader in paying living wage. They really helped set the methodology for that. And I really, really loved the work that I was doing there. The reason that I left is that I actually just wanted to leave New York. So I had been there for about a decade. I wanted a different pace of life. That's really all that it came down to. So left on beautiful terms with the team. We're still very much in touch, and left in 2018 and started to do consulting and that type of thing. But basically earlier this year, and this is what brings me to the mining work. So thank you for the patience thus far.
It's amazing.
So through Tiffany, I actually was introduced to something called the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance. So we call it IRMA, which in Portuguese, of course, has a different meaning, but a nice one. And the idea of IRMA is that we certify mines against a definition of what it means to mine responsibly. And let me just unpack this for you a little bit. So basically, in 2006, IRMA gathered around the table groups of stakeholders who have an interest in mining. So mining companies, purchasers, so people like Tiffany, and others who purchase mine materials, nonprofit groups, communities that are living in areas where the mine is, and labor, so the people who the organizations that represent the workers. So these 5 groups came together, and over the course of a decade decided, when you're thinking about mining, what are all of the aspects that you actually need to think of in terms of how to mine responsibly? So fair labor, protection of biodiversity, these types of things, right? And they basically came up with 26 chapters, 26 topics, and then came up with the specific requirements to say, this is what it means to mine responsibly. So so what happens then is a mine can apply to be audited against this standard. And so an auditor will come in and say, okay, these are all of the requirements. How do you perform against these requirements? And through the report from that audit, other stakeholders, purchasers, communities, labor, can look at that report and they can assess, okay, what are the practices actually happening at the mine site? Are there improvements that need to be made vis-a-vis water management or waste management or whatever it might be? And so it's really about understanding what's happening at the mine site and then opening that up in a transparent way for a conversation to happen, for, again, communities who live close to the mine to ask for changes, or purchasers who are buying from that mine to ask for changes. So that is the second side to my work, is working on that. So you can see basically how it was refined over that decade. And now I'm at a place, I mean, I love, love, love this work. Not that I didn't love all the jobs before, but I think it's just, like there's some patience that goes into a professional career, I would say. And if you early on aren't over the moon about what you're working on, explore something else that you love and that you're interested in. Like, I taught English for 4 years. It was really good. The students were fantastic, but there were aspects of teaching, such as preparing lessons, that I didn't love. And so, and now I'm doing such different work than that, and it's okay that it's taken that evolution.
What's I need to ask you, because that's one question that I always like to ask to people that do different jobs and work in different areas, which is, and now I'm talking specifically about your work with Tiffany and with Irma, and what are 1, 2, 3 key lessons that you learned while doing this work that you feel that you can apply to another area in your life? You know, I mean, if there's any, I'll give you an example just to clarify. Before I started both of my companies, my passion was music, so I was studying jazz, and I wanted to be a jazz guitarist. And for years and years and years, I've crafted the art of improvisation, and that specific skill is one thing that, even though I had a wrist injury and I had to stop, when I switched to the entrepreneurial side, my ability to improvise in under certain circumstances was one of the key lessons that I took from music and applied in all different areas. So I'm wondering if there's some equivalent to this to mining in other areas of your life.
Absolutely. Yes, I would say being able to look through the lenses of other stakeholders. So I worked in we call it the purchasing sector, right? In sort of the corporate sector. But before that, I had worked for several nonprofits. And so when I come to this, I can actually look through the lenses of both the corporate sector and what is most important to them. What do they need to actually do their job well? And then to look at the nonprofit sector as well. What do they need to do their job well, right? And to serve those that they're seeking to serve. And so I would say, actually, the range of different work that I had over the course of those 20 years allows me to put on different glasses and see the same situation through many different lenses. So that's one really big one that I would say. The next I would say is maybe just prioritization, to be honest. I think in a lot of my work, you think of all the different things that you could do and all of the different ways that you can have impact. And so I think, oh gosh, I'm kind of hesitating on this one. Like, how do I actually sort of describe it more fully for you? But I would just say really knowing how to pick what is the most important thing to work on in any given day has been honed over time. And maybe that's not necessarily work, but just age. Like maybe it's not necessarily the specific jobs, but it's more just time, and you just realize
that's great. But that's great as well. So Rebecca, let's move to Green Elbows, if that's okay for you. And
of
I know
course.
that I checked, of course, your website, and you have there 1 or 2 paragraphs explaining the name Green Elbows. But I would love for you to explain to everyone what is Green Elbows and why that specific name.
Absolutely. So Green Elbows, the idea of elbows came to me about a year ago when I was thinking, do we really need to have a green thumb? Like, I feel like there's a lot of pressure. So in English, green thumb means, of course, that you have an ease with plants, that you can easily grow plants, that everything that you touch lives and thrives. Okay, so that's kind of the thing about it. And basically, as I started, so along all of this line of work that I'm talking about, my professional life, in New York, when I was there, I started to be interested in plants again. basically. And I started out just growing succulents, to be honest. So there's a process where you can grow a little succulent from a leaf, and someone taught me how to do it. And I was so enchanted by it that then I started to buy other plants, and I started a little garden on my patio. And as I shared this newfound love with people, this newfound love that I had with plants, so many people would say, oh, I have a brown thumb. Everything that I touch dies. Even cactuses that are supposed to live through everything die. And I was so sad because, one, because I just felt like they weren't giving themselves a chance,
Yeah.
right? So I felt like if they didn't feel like if they were perfect, then they would just not engage with caring for plants at all.
Yeah.
And that made me really sad. So the idea was, no need to have a green thumb. Just come with whatever part of you, just come as you are, come imperfect and clumsy and whatever it is, and let's work with that. So the idea is that the elbow is, there's not a lot of pressure on it, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's not, meaning nobody looks at their, looks for a mate of like, they want beautiful eyes
Yeah.
or a nice
Yeah.
smile.
Yeah.
They're
No one
attracted to,
wants a beautiful
they're
elbow.
not. Exactly. They're not hoping for a dreamy elbow, so there's not a lot of pressure. Also, sometimes it's clumsy, you can hit it and hit your funny bone, or in English, we have an expression like she or he is all elbows, like she's all elbows, meaning that she's kind of bumping around and not really coordinated. So that's really where it came from. Just come as a human and let's interact with plants, because deep within you, there is a connection to nature, and there is a connection to green and caring for plants.
Yeah, and I just want to go straight there because I'm going to be totally honest with you. When I saw your page, and I knew that I had to interview you because I saw as we were talking about Resves, you work with them, and I saw your page, your Instagram page, and I went there, and I just remembered, and this is personal, but I just remembered my grandma when I was a little small kid. She
Yeah.
really loved plants, and I didn't understand why. I was just playing soccer or whatever, and the ball would eat a plant, and she would be like, "No, watch out, watch out, watch out!" And for some reason, when I watched your page, that memory came back to me, and I was like, and I haven't thought about plants in a long time, okay? But when I saw it, that
Okay.
memory came to me, and I realized precisely what you're saying is I feel that we have some kind of, and even though we don't grow it, but I feel that we have some kind of connection with nature and with plants, because there's a lot of people that I know and admire, and one of the common threads between them is that they garden, and I never realized that
Huh.
until seeing your page and realizing, yeah, there's something really special about it, and I don't have a question about this, but I would love to hear your thoughts about that connection with the green and with plants and everything else.
That's beautiful. I'm getting chills as you're speaking, to be honest, because, um, gosh, well, first of all, this deep connection, if we think about our evolution and the pace of how we live, it's only recently that the pace has accelerated to what we live in today, right? In
Yeah.
terms of just invention and technology and all of that. So if you think about the pace of what we evolved in, it is more in the pace of plants, meaning kind of slow growth, the rhythm of the seasons,
Precisely.
right? So I think that there's something when we care for a plant and when we're there that speaks to this very deep part of us that wants to slow down, to be honest, and not even slow down, but just return to the slowness of what it means to be, right?
That's
I
such a great
um
quote.
yeah. And just we're so expected to do and produce and hustle, right? There's so many messages along those lines in the world, yeah, along those lines out in the world today. And I think plants are this amazing teacher that everything happens in its own time, right? You think about plants, they follow the rhythm of nature, the rhythm of the seasons, and they just take their time to do what they need to do in a steady, beautiful way. And I think when we come to them and watch the beauty, just the beauty of that, we're reminded of our own rhythm, I would say, our own sort of quieter rhythm, um, to explore, to be in the sun, to all of that, to just get away from a screen and to actually connect with what is real before us.
Yeah.
So that's what I
You have,
think there's a really big, yeah,
yeah, yeah, I mean, I just want to say you have
please.
this beautiful quote on your website, and I'm reading so I don't butcher it. And it's, "We want to welcome you into slowness and wonder." And I thought that was just beautiful put.
Thank
And
you.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, that's it. So just for the person, the audience listening, can you elaborate a little bit on what specifically does Green Elbow do? So you have a couple
Yes,
of services. Can
absolutely.
you talk about them?
Absolutely. So the big focus for this year is a community garden. So COVID, actually, I think there's a whole conversation and exploration going on about what did COVID take from us this year and what did it bring to us, right? I think that's been a question that a lot of people ask, and I think it is a good question to reflect on because it's been such a different year. And so for me, what did it bring? Well, it brought a garden. And basically, I was able to start a vegetable garden in April. And it was the first one that I ever started. And I called my sister and father for a conference call before I started it to get their advice. And they both started the call. And one of them said, well, it's really hard doing a garden. And they both just sort of paused. And I was like, I know, that's why I'm asking you. And then they both just started laughing. They were like, no, it's not hard at all. It's totally easy. It's going to be fine. Like, don't be nervous about it. Right. And it was this lovely connection point that we had. And they're absolutely right. When I think about gardening, yes, there's work that we need to do, but 99% of the work that makes a garden, it comes from the soil, the sun, water, and the plant itself, right?
Yeah.
That's actually what's doing the work. So, and that's really what I discovered and it was just such a, like, I would go to the garden and spend hours there, just watching the plants grow, supporting them, maybe putting dirt around the stem so that it wouldn't blow, staking them, all these different things, and just being close to them. I found so much satisfaction. And then I had a lot of extra from my growth. And so I would bring it into my co-working space. And the people who were there would say, gosh, I would really love to have a garden as well, because Ericeira is quite a built environment, right? Like it's,
Yeah.
all pavement and apartments. So nobody really has green space in their house, near their house. And I was talking to a friend about just this idea of my garden and how much I would love to bring gardening to other people. And he was from Germany and talked about this program in Germany where he had joined, and they basically provided everything that he needed: water, seeds, materials, and a space to grow. So I just got to thinking, and long story short, I am now renting a plot of land about, in the next town over, and having and hosting a community garden next year. But it's more than a community garden, it's a guided program. So it's taking you by the hand and basically saying, this is not as scary as you think it is, and let's go hand in hand, let's plan together our plots, let's plant together, and let's grow together, basically. And so that's really, I would say, the main focus of 2021 for Green Elbows is bringing in a community. There will be about 20 plots there. So bringing in 20 different people who are going to work and have these small parcels of land to grow their own food, to learn together, and to experiment with different growing techniques. So that's what I'm really, really excited about. And then the
Yeah.
other service that I offer is plant design. So this is where you learned about through RegVez, is basically figuring out what is the actual design aesthetic of a space, and then what do they want plants to serve, right? Meaning, do you want plants for just their look? Do you want them to purify the air? Do you want to, this would be more for a patio, but do you want to grow like herbs and food on them? What do you actually want plants to serve? So you have the aesthetic, the service, and then just sort of the care, how much care can you give, or how much do you know about plants? So I take all of that information and put it into a plan for them. So this is the recommendation is these are the types of plants that you should get, and this is how you should place them. These are the containers that you should buy because they match your design aesthetic. So it's basically figuring out what is already existing, who is already in the space, right? In terms of who's going to care for it and what do they need from the plants. And then proposing a design that integrates into those different aspects.
No,
And I've done that now for several places, several friends, and some clients as well. And yeah, I love that process of design.
I need to ask you this, because this is what blew my mind, which is I know that you graduated, no, but you studied landscape design, and so I understand that you use probably some of those elements to do that work with plant design. But how did you come up with that idea? Because that I mean, it's simple, it's beautiful, and it's obvious, because a plant always gives this nice touch to a room. But I would never ever, so I wouldn't be able to think like, well, I should create something where I help people to understand the right plant into the right place. So how did you come up with that idea, if I may ask?
You certainly can ask. This goes back to when I was having my own discovery of plants and falling in love with them again, which honestly was only about 5 years ago. Going back to your original question,
Yeah.
when do you need to know, when do you need to have it figured out what you want to do? Well, I'm now in a career track that's totally that I've just started exploring 5 years ago, and now I'm launching a whole business based around it. So back, I was in New York. I had just started my own patio garden, and I was at a birthday party, and there was a girl who had a patio, and she said, oh, I really want to get started, but I don't know what plants to choose. So honestly, I just went, and she sent me pictures of her space, and then I looked online for some inspiration, like how could she set this up. We talked about what colors she wanted to use, for example, and basically I sent her some photos to say, this is what I would think in terms of inspiration. It was kind of a mood board. And then I said, okay, in terms of the color, she wanted mostly green. I would recommend like these 5 plants, and you could, train some of the plants to go up this fence that you have. Basically, I don't need to get into the details, but it was a very organic process of thinking about what she wanted in the space, what I knew of plants to that point, using inspiration from elsewhere. I think it's fine to do that, right? I think as creatives people, we're always borrowers. So I would that's something that I would add. And you combine all of that to create this space. And the before and after was so fun to see. And then I showed a couple of friends, another friend wanted help. And so I just started to refine my process. And that's when I designed this little quiz, actually, that's called, What is Your Design Aesthetic? And so someone takes it, it's kind of like a BuzzFeed quiz, right? When it's like, I don't know, what Game of Thrones character are you? You answer these questions and then you find out. And so there's a whole bunch of questions that you can figure out your design aesthetic. And once I know that, and then we have a conversation about the things that I mentioned before, how you'll use the plants and such. And then I just think I've always had this love of like design and spaces. And then when I get to incorporate plants in it, all the better. And so honestly, it was just like it organically grew, and people would just ask for it, would just ask for my help. And with each new person that asked for it, I refined my process in terms of getting all of the information that I needed from them. And then I also and also refined it in terms of putting together a whole set of mood boards, like a whole set of pictures of like, okay, in this corner, you can create a little dining room. Here's 5 images of what that might look like. Right. And then I started to design. This is actually where landscape architecture came in from 20 years before, 15 years, I guess, at that point, was like those bird's eye view plans. Right. So if you think about an architectural plan, when you look at it from above, you see the layout of where everything goes. And so I used some of that very early training to actually do the layouts, to explain to people, this is where you should actually position the plants, and this is why.
So let me ask you one more question, which is, and I don't even know if that's possible, but I was listening to you, and that this question just came to mind, which is, do you have any way to measure the impact that the plant has on a space? Because I'll try to clarify. I remember that I once went to a birthday party, and my friend, she offered everyone a small cactus. I'm one of those brown thumbs, all right. Everything that I touch, it's not.
It'll
that
take
good.
you as you are.
Yeah. But she offered this small cactus to everyone, and I remember that I brought him home and I put it over on my desk, and I noticed this change in my mood when I was going to work, you know.
Oh.
And I was really good, and I in that week I remember perfectly that when in that week I was reviewing my week, and I was just noticing that I had my mood elevated, and I was asking myself, well, what changed? I mean, the work was the same, the things were the same, and I realized that it was a small plant right over there. So I was wondering, is there any way, or have you thought about this, try to measure the impact that the flower, the plant has in terms of what the original goal was? Is there any way you can do that? No.
Wow, your question is beautiful. And I know we're on a podcast, so people can't see that I was smiling the whole time that you were asking the question and sharing this. But I was, because I mean, what you described is the effect of plants. So I love that, first of all, that you noticed it. That's amazing. And I think that that happens for a lot of people. In terms of studying the impact, gosh, it definitely has been studied. Um, I have listened to a lot of podcasts where it's mentioned, and I've heard different percentages in terms of plants boosting creativity, productivity, calm. You know, there's actually a really great study where they put, I hope that I'm getting this right, but I think they put heart monitors on city dwellers. So basically, imagine you're in New York City, you get this heart monitor, and what they did is that they monitored how your heart rate changed in different parts of the city. And so as you walk through the neighborhoods, maybe it went down. As you walked through Times Square, maybe it went up. And what they noticed is that when you went into parks, into green spaces, so imagine Central Park, right? This beautiful space, the heart rate dropped, right? In a good way, in a calm way. To just be steadier, like going back to what I was saying before, this slower, more natural rhythm. And so there's been a lot of studies that basically say being in green spaces calms us, nourishes our creativity, and really just sort of centers us, right? And that is definitely enhanced when you go into a green space. But I think they've also shown that even seeing pictures of green spaces can actually also help. So I personally have not studied it. I think it would be a great study. I think more than anything, I've just experienced it.
Yeah.
Experienced it for myself, hearing stories like the one you've just shared, and also so many stories that have come in over the years, especially since I launched Green Elbows. Actually, there was a friend who just sent a picture of a little flowering plant that she has by a window, and she says, this brings me such joy every December when it flowers. So I just wanted to share it with you, right? And so it's more anecdotal that I've heard, but definitely there's scientific experiments that show how much being with plants enhances our health.
Yeah, perfect.
And our well-being.
Yeah, Rebecca, I just have two more questions. And the first
Okay.
one is, to everyone that hears this podcast and thinks, okay, I want to get in touch with plants, but I don't have a garden, and my community garden ain't possible, and I live in an apartment in the middle of Lisbon. Let's say this person is me. All right, let's just imagine. What's one first step that I can do to start connecting with nature and with plants?
It's such a good question. I would recommend that you buy one plant, and a very easy one. So I'll give you just one suggestion, which is a pothos, Pothos. That's the word in English, at least. And it is like indestructible plant, meaning it can survive all different kinds of light, all different kinds of watering, and it grows like crazy, and it looks beautiful. It's this beautiful sort of viney plant that it can either grow up something, right? If you give it a pole to climb, it will climb, or it can actually hang down. And I think those plants are beautiful because basically it's a plant that just allows you to see new leaf growth. When it starts to get really big and you pull it out of the pot, you're going to see the root structure, and maybe move it into a bigger pot at some point. But it's basically, I would say, just start with one plant.
All right.
Make it an easy one so that you don't reinforce the I call it an untruth because I don't think it's true, but don't reinforce this idea that you have a brown thumb, right?
Yeah.
This plant it loves all, it's like the dog of the plant world, right? It loves everyone. Anyway, I love this plant. And so I would just start with a really easy plant to care for and start to just sort of be with it and see its growth. And then just see if you want to add another one, or just think, in terms of integrating into your life. I think the other biggest thing is you don't have to give your life over to this, right? Like you don't have to create a jungle in your living room. You don't have to, become the master gardener at Estrella Park or whatever. It can just be the incorporation where, like you said, you saw this little cactus on your desk and it brought you happiness. And I promise you that if you get this plant, like a new little leaf as it uncurls will bring you happiness, right? And just that small connection to the plant world, I think, can open you up to maybe you notice like wildflowers that are in the, some small pavements along in Lisbon when you're going on a walk in the spring, or I think it will just kind of open your eyes to the green world a bit more.
Yeah.
So I would say one really easy, gentle step.
That's beautiful. Rebecca, before I ask you the last question, if people want to find out a little bit more about you and about Green Elbows, we'll put the links to the website below. But if they want to connect with you, what's the best way to do it?
Perfect. It would be Instagram. Actually, I'm on there a lot, and more I'm creating content to help followers figure out plant care, plant propagation, that type of thing. And so it's just green.elbows.
Yeah,
is
perfect.
my Instagram handle. Yeah.
We'll leave all the links on the descriptions. And so let me just ask you the last question, which is the question that I ask every guest, which is, what drives you?
Oh, such a good question. Okay, what drives me? Honestly, it is a love of humans. We've been talking a lot about a love of plants and a love of the green world, but it's actually a love of people. And that is what drives me.
Perfect.
There you go. I'll leave
Rebecca,
it at that.
I just want to thank you once again so much. It was a delightful conversation. To everyone listening, you can find Rebecca on the links that we'll leave in the description, as well as follow the podcast on any platform that you use. So we'll see you next episode.